The best thing about being a medieval doctor on this list is the fact you trained for years and years just for everyone to ignore you anyway. While today doctors are seen as respected professionals, in the medieval world, physicians occupied a strange middle ground. A university trained doctor, usually male, might be intellectual, but that didn't always translate into good social standing. Unless you worked for a noble household or a royal court, your status could be equivalent to that of a craftsman or a skilled labourer. Worse, your advice might be ignored in favour of that from a monk, mystic, or herbalist, especially among the rural poor. The thing is, doctors are often regarded with suspicion, accused of taking money without delivering results, which you can understand why as you go through this list, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This was made worse due to the fact doctors travelled around a lot. Most places had rural travelling doctors that were unknown to the community and forced to build trust from scratch every single time. As you might have guessed from this time period, women were largely excluded from university training, so female healers like midwives and herbalists were common, but considered unofficial. Ironically, these were almost certainly more effective than their male counterparts. Okay, not the best start for being a medieval doctor, but at least they got paid well. Only joking. This is the next sucky thing about being a doctor in this time: poor pay and travel. Medical services were costly and patients couldn't afford them. Many physicians worked for the hope of payment, often accepting goods like eggs, ale, wool, or firewood instead of coins. To make things worse, most doctors had to travel long distances on foot or horseback with no guarantee of safety or reward. A doctor might be summoned 20 miles away through forests or across flooded rivers, only to arrive after the patient had already passed away, or had been healed by a faith healer or local herb woman. But the first option is a lot more likely. On the off chance this didn't happen, doctors were often refused payment when their treatments failed. Which is probably fair, but what's a patient going to do if your treatment failed? It's like taking candy from a baby. The problem with travelling long distances to patients was the fact that bandits were common on roads. Physicians were seen as targets, often assumed to carry money or expensive tools. So even if you did make a bit of money from a patient, you could lose all of it on your way home. It's like taking candy from a baby. Moving on to the next reason why it sucked to be a medieval doctor is you had constant competition from quacks and charlatans. With no centralised licensing system, anyone with a bag of herbs or a knack for storytelling could pose as a doctor. These self-proclaimed healers ranged from wandering alchemists to snake oil salesmen selling secret elixirs at fairs. They often drew bigger crowds and made more money than trained physicians, especially because their cures were spectacularly packaged and promised quick results. Charlatans might use coloured wine or honey water with spices and call it the essence of Egyptian healing. They'd sell it for 2 silver coins, while a real doctor might charge the same for a basic consultation. Tooth pullers, bone setters and plague charmers set up booths in marketplaces, using public demonstrations and paid actors to fake recoveries. One notable scam involved urine prophets, who claimed they could diagnose every illness by the colour and smell of a sample, often without ever meeting the patient. They might have made more money than medieval doctors, but I think we found a worse job: being a medieval urine smeller. Only joking, life as a medieval doctor gets way worse. So let's keep moving on with this list. Next we have patients, and more specifically, patients' unrealistic expectations. The thing is, during this time, people didn't separate medicine from religion, magic or fate. Disease was often viewed as punishment from God or the result of demonic activity. Therefore, physicians were expected to both diagnose and spiritually redeem a person. If someone passed away under their care, even if you followed all available knowledge, you would probably be blamed for it anyway. Not just socially, but sometimes legally or physically. A physician treating a noble's son who passed away of typhoid might be accused of witchcraft, especially if the family was already politically paranoid or had enemies. That could result in being imprisoned, banished, or even executed. In some communities, if a plague outbreak followed shortly after a visit by a doctor, superstitious villagers might stone them or burn their belongings, believing they had brought the sickness with them. I mean, to be fair, I'm kind of on the general people's side here because doctors just didn't wash their hands, so it's probably a fair assumption. But anyway, patients wanted instant cures. If someone didn't feel better after a bloodletting or herbal treatment, they might refuse to pay, spread rumours, or switch to a mystic healer. Pretty rude if you ask me. Most doctors were just trying their best. It's just unfortunate that their best made everyone even more ill. Okay, now let's move into the top 5 reasons it sucked to be a medieval doctor. Something that heavily affected medieval doctors' ability to learn and get better was the dominant power of the church. During this heavily religious time, the body was seen as sacred, so anatomical dissection was banned or limited for centuries. This left doctors relying on ancient texts that were often outdated or completely inaccurate. An example of this is the works of Galen from ancient Greece, which were considered gospel, even though he'd based much of his understanding on monkey anatomy. He believed blood was made in the liver and used up in the muscles. Yeah, sounds about right. The reason this was believed for so long is that no one could prove otherwise. To perform post-mortems, doctors had to gain special permission, which was very rarely granted. Even if it was granted, they were watched carefully and could only dissect criminals or heretics. This is why treatments like astrology charts, amulets, or saintly relics were used alongside or instead of actual medicines. It kind of muddled the line between medicine and folk religion at the time. Even those that were best educated were trained in just bad science. The four humors models ruled everything. Germs, immunity, and the concept of specific pathogens were completely unknown. Therefore, diagnosis was essentially guesswork based on colour, smell, and pulse. If someone had yellow skin and vomited bile, a doctor might declare the choleric humour was dominant. The treatment? Well, induced vomiting, leaching, or sweating. This made sense at the time, but it would often weaken and kill the patient. Fevers were treated with cold foods based on the belief that too much heat was present in the body, and a cough might be treated with burnt goat dung or drinking the milk of a white horse, because why not? If nothing else works, you might as well try that. Okay, let's move on away from all this ineffective medicine to medicine that is toxic. Oh, goody. So to start with, dosage of medicine wasn't understood. Testing was non-existent, and ingredients were sometimes collected in questionable ways, from graves, latrines, or animal innards. An example of this is good old toxic mercury, which was still widely used in the Renaissance period to rub on sores. Some negative side effects of this were delirium, organ failure, and patients to lose their life. I'm starting to see why medieval doctors weren't getting paid very well. Another example of some medicine during the time, which, if you were a well-off doctor, you could provide for your patients, was theriac, which was a complex medicine made of up to 70 ingredients. These ingredients could include snake flesh, opium, and honey. Some recipes were hundreds of years old, copied throughout history. Initially renowned as an antidote against poisons, it soon became a cure-all remedy, and a true theriac industry developed in several countries. It was still being used in the 19th century as a common remedy against several conditions, but as you can imagine, this has now been proven as completely ineffective. Unless snake flesh is a secret ingredient in paracetamol. Has anybody read the back of the packaging? But don't look now, because this list is getting worse. We're going to talk about the gore that came from horrifying tools and procedures. When you think of surgeries during this time, it's pretty brutal, isn't it? With no anaesthesia beyond opium or strong alcohol, patients were tied down or held by multiple people, while a surgeon worked quickly and blindly. Tools were crude bone saws, cautery irons and hooks, rarely cleaned and often reused immediately between patients. During an amputation, the surgeon might slice through flesh with a curved blade, saw the bone, then cauterise the stump with a red-hot iron. Screaming was expected and survival was rare. Imagine you somehow make it through all of that and then almost certainly get an infection and lose your life anyway. Thanks, doctor. A procedure way worse than this is trepanation, which means drilling into the skull to relieve pressure, or evil spirits. Okay, this sounds really rough, even with modern day power drills, but in medieval times, Bosch power drills weren't a thing, so the procedure was done with primitive drills, and this was all while the patient was awake. This sounds like a lot of hard work for the doctor trying to drill through a thick skull by hand, but I guess you could make a case for it being harder for the patient. The final example I have for these horrifying procedures, as honestly I could go on all day, is eye surgeries like cataract removal. They involved pushing a needle behind the eyeball to displace the lens, blinding patients permanently. I'm starting to not feel as sorry for these doctors anymore, because I don't know how this ever seemed like a good idea. But I'm back to feeling bad for the doctors with this penultimate reason on this list. It's the danger of catching diseases. Doctors treated patients up close, often mouth to mouth, examining urine, blood and phlegm. With no concept of how disease was spread, doctors were exposed constantly. Plague, smallpox, dysentery and leprosy were all highly infectious. Medieval doctors had very little protection. Doctors who visited multiple homes in a day were essentially super spreaders, like giant rats. This usually meant that roles were reversed and they were a patient within a few weeks. The one bit of protection doctors did have was the iconic plague mask with a long beak which was stuffed with herbs to filter miasma, otherwise known as bad air. But to be honest, it helped very little. Even non-plague illnesses like typhoid or dysentery spread easily via contaminated hands and clothing, and physicians didn't wash their hands between patients. So, yeah, it was rough. In cities like Florence and Paris, entire groups of doctors passed away during waves of plagues, leaving only charlatans and clergy to care for the sick, and everyone was probably better for it. Sorry, doctors. You can add that to the list as a little bonus reason it sucked to be a doctor during this time. But that doesn't compare to the worst thing on this list, and that is, despite all the hard work, getting robbed and catching the plague yourself, everyone still passed away, almost immediately after seeing you. You could study, travel, try dozens of remedies, and most of your patients will still suffer horribly. This led to emotional burnout, despair, and even religious doubt. Some doctors left the profession completely, while others became hardened or deluded themselves into thinking that their failures, they were just divine punishment and not their fault. Ultimately, a medieval doctor's career was shaped by loss, powerlessness, and fear, and an inability to do more than watch helplessly as the world bled and burnt around them. So the next time you think about travelling back in time in order to get your hands on one of those lovely beaked masks, well, think again. Just lay back and watch another video. And why not subscribe to the guy that gave you that sound advice? Thanks, I'll see you next time.